How many warehouses do you have in your distribution network? It's a key question, and sometimes the number you have is too many. We're going to be talking about why that is and some of the impacts coming right up. So this week we are talking about distribution networks, the number of warehouses you have in the network, what determines that, and what can happen if you have too many. So why are we talking about this topic in particular? So the reason I've picked this topic is that recently I was looking at the consulting assignments that we've been doing at Logistics Bureau over the last couple of years. And I found there was a trend, and the sorts of challenges that we're helping our clients with in logistics fell into a number of buckets. And the most common challenge was related to warehousing. So that's why I want to talk about this week. If you like this format of video, we can certainly extend this and we can start going through all of the other common challenges which related to outsourcing, which related to freight and inventory, profitability, fleet optimization, and so on. So do comment down below, like and share, and that way I know that this is going to be a topic of interest. So let's move right along on the topic of warehousing. So some of the common symptoms that we see that people are facing, some of the common challenges that people are facing at the moment around warehousing are these. The first one that we're going to be talking about this week is too many warehouses in the network, and why is that a bad thing? Again, if you like this format, next week we'll go on to talk about warehouse management systems and some of the mistakes people make there. We can also then move on to talk about poor layout and warehouse processes. And why are these particularly important to get right? Well, because these are some of the impacts of not getting these right. We get far too many touches in the warehouse and through our distribution network. And if you've heard me use that phrase before, it basically means, as it says, we're handling the product too many times. Think about your own warehouse for a moment and the number of times the product is touched, from being receipted, put away, picked, packed, dispatched, and so on. If you're handling it more than 5 or 6 times, it's probably too many. And why is that a bad thing? Because every time you're touching it, you're incurring cost with additional handling, and every time you touch it, there's potential for damage. So do look at the number of touches, not just in your warehouse, but through the network end to end. Obviously, if we have inefficient warehousing or too many warehouses, we're going to get excess cost and we can impact our service as well. What's the benefit of fixing these things? Again, I looked at some stats over the last couple of years, and typically by rectifying these sorts of issues, we can get a 4 to 7% increase in service levels, which is good. We can certainly get less damage from our product, and generally we're looking at about 5 to 14% less warehouse cost. So it's worth doing, isn't it? Let's have a look at this first one then, too many warehouses in the network and why that can be a bad thing. Okay, so I'm going to be using a couple of diagrams or maps of Australia here. These sorts of principles apply wherever you are in the world. Do comment down below and let me know where you're watching this from. And I've conducted these sorts of studies, I think, in about 22 countries. So the principles are pretty much the same. And we're going to look at some of the implications of having too many warehouses in your network and kind of what that causes. So we're looking here at a map of Australia. And you might be saying, well, how many warehouses do I need to cover Australia? It simply comes down to one thing. What's your service offer? If you're going to be offering a next day service, that's one thing. You've got to be able to reach all of your customers by the next day to make that delivery. If you're offering a 2 or 3 or 4 day service, things are a lot easier and you don't need so many warehouses because you don't need the stock so close to the customer. Conversely, if you're offering a very high level of service, and I can think of an example where they had a 4-hour service level, you're going to have a lot more stock locations because you've got to have all your stock within 4 hours of the customer. So that one I'm thinking of was a beverage company, and they had something like 40 warehouses across the country because they had this 4-hour service level. I was intrigued by that because I wondered, could you actually do it with less? And that brings me on to another point, because not only have you got to have the stock closer to your customer if you have a very high service level, but one of the other things you've got to be very careful about is how you allocate your customers to different warehouses. And so this map here is showing the distribution. This is not replenishment or transfers. This is all customer distribution. So, for example, we've got a warehouse on the west coast here in Perth, which appears to have delivered product to Melbourne in the east. Why? There's a couple of reasons for that. One, we may have very poor inventory deployment across the network. So think about that. How are you deploying inventory? The more warehouses you've got, the harder it is to get that right. And what happens is you end up with puddling of inventory or SLOBEX, slow, obsolete, and excess stock all over the network because it's just harder to deploy. And what happens is you end up with this stock puddling around the network. It sits there, or you've actually got to, incur some transport cost and move it to where it's needed. So that could be this particular movement. There's another one here going from Melbourne to Brisbane. Could be the same reason. So think about stock deployment. The other thing is that there can be very poor allocation of customers to warehouses, and that could be happening here as well. So historically, perhaps, I mean, this is not a good example, but let's pick the Melbourne one. Why is Melbourne delivering to Brisbane? Well, perhaps historically the customer was based in Melbourne, but now they've moved to Brisbane, and they're still allocated to the Melbourne warehouse, or they've opened another branch in Brisbane, and no one's sort of taken the time or the inclination to check which warehouse should they be serviced from. So do make sure that you're servicing your customers from the most logical warehouse, and that gets rid of all these sort of internal transfers and sort of cross-border deliveries. So coming back to my example now of this beverage warehouse, they had 40 branches or warehouses, and I wanted to challenge that and say, well, do you really need 40, even though you're offering a 4-hour service level? And through modeling the customer locations and looking at the allocation of customers to warehouses, we actually dropped that to about 20. It might have been 22. But it just shows you that with that proper customer allocation, proper inventory deployment, you can reduce that. Now, you're probably, if you know Australia, you're going to be going, but Rod, that's Mount Isa. How can you get to there in 4 hours? Or that's Alice Springs. How can you get to there in 4 hours? I'm not talking about 100% service level. That can be very, very hard to achieve in any distribution network. We might be looking for 78, 97, 98, 99%. There's always going to be a few. So the question was raised in this example, well, do we need to have a warehouse here? Or, even that's not going to work. Do we need to have a warehouse here to be able to get to there in 4 hours? No, it's just not worth the cost. You have to accept that some customers in the network, maybe 1%, 2%, you might not be able to achieve that service level. So why drop from 40 warehouses to 20? What's the benefit? You might be saying, it's going to be more risk around customer service. Think about all of that line haul transport cost. That's going to reduce. Think about the infrastructure cost of all those warehouses. That's going to reduce. The systems costs, the labor costs, the inventory cost. There is only one cost that actually reduces the more warehouses you have in the network. Think about that for a moment. There's one cost. More warehouses you have in the network, and that is the local distribution cost, the delivery cost. Quite simply because you are now putting the stock closer to the customers. So you've got to find that sort of balance point on the curve, where you've got number of warehouses and cost. You've got 1 to 10 warehouses or whatever it might be, and the costs going up here. You've got to find that point in the curve which makes sense for you in terms of the right number of distribution centers, warehouses through the network. And it's going to be very dependent on the geography, your service offer. It's not the same for everybody. So some examples just down below here, again, picking Australia. If we had something like a 4-day service level, or, we're going to deliver within a week, we can get all over the country within a week. It's not a problem. And the location could be Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, typically. In this example, this is quite a common sort of format. Can we do next day delivery? Just about to most people. So we've got Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. The reason I'm saying just about is if we didn't have Melbourne, Sydney to Adelaide is very tricky next day. But we could do next day to most customers there. This also is a classic one in Australia where we have a main DC on the East Coast servicing the East Coast and a satellite on the West Coast servicing WA. That's probably, a 2 or 3 day service level type model. So do have a look at your own distribution network, particularly look at things like, so it's not just about the number of warehouses in the network, but how are we deploying inventory across that network? Have we got, obsolete stock building up in certain locations, not obsolete, but excess? Have we got the right allocation of customers to our warehouses, or are we, doing cross-border distribution and that type of thing? All of those things can help you significantly reduce your cost. Okay, so there we go. We're talking about the number of warehouses in your network. A couple of things to think about. If you like this format, do let me know, because I could probably do another 12 or 15 like this, looking at different aspects of supply chain and logistics. Just to help me out and to know whether this is of interest. If you enjoyed it, do comment. Tell me where you're watching this from, what country, what city, what the classic sort of network looks like in your own country. Is it, one East Coast, one West Coast, that type of thing? Do subscribe, do comment, do like. That way I know that's of interest and I'll do more of them. It's kind of the only way I get feedback. But thank you for watching and see you next week. Bye for now.